Hello everyone, this is Ponder on Weather. In this update, we've got newly developed Tropical Depression number 9 expected to rapidly intensify with impacts through the Caribbean and heading into the Gulf by early next week with possible U.S. landfall. Welcome back everyone. Happy Friday out there. We got a lot to talk about in this update. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's take a look at the satellite picture this morning, and we can definitely see formidable category 3 now. Hurricane Fiona is really powerful storm. These winds are expanding hundreds of miles. That is lifting northbound and accelerating and going to have high impacts into portions of Atlantic Canada and could potentially see their strongest, lowest barometric pressure on land of ever. So this could possibly be an historic event going to be impacting tonight, heading into tomorrow for a good chunk of Atlantic Canada. So that's a huge concern for them. Then there we have newly developed Tropical Depression number 9 that we've been tracking over the last couple of days. But there's also another system out here that's coming off the coast of Africa. Yeah, these two storms could actually be named at the same time. So it's just semantics on which one actually gets named first. The next name on the list would be Hermine, and then after that would be Ian. And ironically, the letter I is the most retired name in the alphabet. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about what lies ahead and a lot of impacts to come. So let's really kind of delve into the details this morning and take a look at the newly developed track from the National Hurricane Center. Does in fact, they named it as a tropical depression early this morning with 35-mile-per-hour winds. We do not have yet a low-level center as of yet. It's still kind of influenced by Fiona still, but I think in the next 24 hours, we will be having a storm, and it's going to be expected to rapidly intensify. So you can see it's going to be shifting westbound. So it could be a storm near the island of Jamaica sometime heading into Sunday time frame, and this will continue to rapidly intensify, possibly being a hurricane near the Cayman Islands early Monday morning, impacting portions of Cuba by Tuesday morning, and then getting into the Gulf of Mexico. You can see the strength here as it rapidly intensifies to nearly a major hurricane, and this is pretty bullish by the National Hurricane Center. Them, almost calling this a potentially major hurricane within the 5-day first initial track. So yes, they wanted to put this guidance out there because we could be having a lot of impacts in portions of Jamaica, getting into the Cayman, and going into Cuba, but then really starting to possibly impact Key West, heading into Florida, going into the day on Tuesday into your Wednesday time frame. So let's highlight some of these time spans where you could possibly see some of these tropical storm force winds starting to impact into your area. You can see as early as tomorrow night, we're talking Saturday night at about 8 o'clock, it could be approaching Jamaica with those tropical storm force winds, as this will continue to intensify into a storm by then. And then it will be shifting off into the Cayman Islands sometime around Sunday evening around 8 o'clock with those tropical storm force winds starting to impact Cuba by Monday morning, and starting to as early as Monday night could be starting to impact, at least feeling the effects from this storm into the Key West area, back into South Florida, and eventually possibly Central Florida and Northern Florida potentially as we get into your Tuesday morning. So let's break this down because it's got a lot of room to work with. I mean, what I mean by that is, here's Fiona. Once this lifts out, there's not much dry air to stop this thing, right? So here's this formidable tropical depression that just formed this morning, and right now the convection is basically away from the center, but it's only a matter of time. I mean, all the guidance is there that this is going to be a rapidly intensify. That's why it could not even be named until maybe possibly another 24 hours. But once it does, wow, all bets are off. It's supposed to be a rapidly intensify, and we could be looking at a major hurricane on our hands by the time we get into your Tuesday and your Wednesday time frame. And there's not much to stop this thing from growing into a serious storm. And we got a lot of deep ocean content. It's been pretty quiet in the tropics. This atmosphere hasn't been really worked over at all. So that's the concern. And we got a great synoptic setup for this, all engines go with this particular system. So this is definitely a concerning storm with a lot of impacts as it continues to going to be ramping up in the days ahead. And there's not much shear to deal with it too. So we have that low pressure center right now just essentially west of the Leeward Islands here. That's entering the Caribbean. And you can see there's not much shear, right? There's not much really to stop this thing. No dry air, not much shear. We got vertical velocities hitting at parameters saying, hey, once this thing gets a low level center, it's not going to stop. It's not going to have much to stop this thing from rapidly starting to intensify. And then once it gets into the Gulf, there's really not much shear to work with either. So this is definitely concerning what lies ahead with this particular system. And let's break this thing down for you. So we're going to highlight where the most concerning impacts and then swing into the Gulf as we get into early next week. So by the time we get into Sunday afternoon, on the precipitable water index, we could be looking at some very heavy rain starting to set up, just the heaviest amounts just south of island of Jamaica. But we could be looking at some heavier rain starting to spread into Jamaica, starting to spread into the Cayman Islands as we get into your Sunday time frame. And the wind gusts could be formidable too, right? So as this continues to ramp up, I think heavy rain is your main concern in Jamaica, but we could be looking at some tropical storm force winds. There's your time frame, possibly Sunday about 5 o'clock there. Yeah, we could be looking at some tropical storm force winds impacting, especially south of the island there, back into Kingston, as this will start to actually try to start to form an eye, and it could actually be a hurricane by the time it actually gets near the Cayman Islands. Right now, the models are kind of hinting at about a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm, but the National Hurricane Center has this ramping up to a hurricane already. Either way, we could be looking at some very heavy rain and intense winds, and these gusts could be approaching 60 to 70 miles an hour back into the Grand Cayman Islands, back into the Cayman Islands, as this will continue to move west northwest and really rapidly intensify the rain rates as well. So as this storm really starts to deepen, as it pulls in some of that deep ocean water content, we're looking at even heavier rains and a good chunk of the Cayman Islands here. So it's definitely going to be an high impact event for you coming up on Sunday into Monday time frame. So here's your wind swath over the next 3 days. So I think this will start to be named a tropical storm sometime tomorrow and have tropical storm force warnings and potentially watches and warnings for Jamaica, and then really start to intensify with possibly hurricane warnings for the Cayman Islands with hurricane force winds impacting those areas over the next 3 days. But once it passes and starts heading towards Cuba and starts getting into the Gulf, it's gonna be influenced by this high pressure center. But here's your overall rain amounts for the next 3 to 5 days. So this is definitely very concerning. Be looking at some very heavy rain, especially on the south side of the island into Jamaica, but really start to ramp up as we get into the Cayman Islands, and that heavier rain will start spreading into Cuba by day 3. So, but once it gets into the Gulf, we got that trough. A lot of you guys are waking up this morning with pretty cool temperatures. We actually had some frost and freeze warnings up here into the upper Great Lakes. We got that pretty significant trough that's going to be diving down. But by the middle of next week, once it gets into the Gulf, it's going to be steered and influenced by this trough that's going to be heading off into the east. This ridge is going to be building in the midsection of the country. And we got another trough going to be approaching the west off the coast here. So that once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to be actually steered and get pulled up from this trough and could actually impact Florida, but then start to impact portions, possibly maybe even a double landfall somewhere in North Carolina is definitely not out of the question, as this could potentially race up the eastern seaboard. So we could be talking about this storm for an extended time frame, because if we look at this hurricane probabilities over the next 10 days, yeah, very concerning. We're looking at a hurricane possible impacting these regions into South Florida, potentially Central Florida. And then once it crosses Florida, it could be influenced by this trough and maybe a potential double landfall with this system, as this would be racing up the East Coast. So let's break this thing down for you once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, because again, it's going to be intensifying. So by the time we get into your Tuesday, say 5 o'clock time frame, here is Key West, here is Marathon, and there is South Florida. So yeah, we could be looking at some estimated winds right now of 87 miles an hour. So that's why we're giving you plenty advanced warning with this system. We've actually already been talking about this system for the past couple of days on this channel. But don't let your guard down because it's not named yet. It might not be named for another 12 and 24 hours, but once it gets named, we're looking at a rapid intensification, and we could be looking at a major hurricane after it gets named and at about a 3-day time span. So yeah, we don't got much wiggle room here, right? So this is why we're giving you a plenty of advanced warning, especially down here. Hey, if you want to exit, you better make this call pretty early on, especially once we get a low level center and get a named storm. That track, that cone of uncertainty will be kind of fine-tuned and kind of bundled up, and then you can make the call then to get out of Dodge if you need to with this particular storm. But yeah, I'm going to be doing updates on this channel, probably going to be doing afternoon updates as well. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you fully advanced warning from this system. But what's concerning is it could be kind of a deja vu, because it takes a similar track of what Hurricane Charlie did back in 2004. So I put the side by side comparison here, right? It's coming out of the Leeward Islands, potentially tracking just south of Jamaica, crossing over Cuba here, and potentially impacting South Florida here, which basically that's what the National Hurricane Center is calling for right now. And then Charlie bottomed out at about a 941 millibar low pressure Category 4 hurricane, and this one is already expected to be potential 110 miles an hour, and I think that's actually going to be ramping up, especially as you get into the Gulf, because there's not much shear once it gets into the Gulf and crosses over Cuba. It just depends on how much it's influenced once it crosses over Cuba here and then gets into the Gulf. But I'm thinking it really starts to rapidly intensify once it does that. So here's your overall intensity. The hurricane centers have been flying into this system, putting back into the models to get a kind of a better track on the system. So all the guidance now, all the models are trending towards Florida here. So Florida looks to be quote unquote the bullseye for this particular setup, and we could be looking at a formidable storm, if not a major hurricane impacts by the time we get into Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe. Here's the intensity track, right? So it's going to take its sweet time to develop, right? And we might not be looking at a storm for another 24, possibly even 36 hours. But once we get past that window, bam, man, all bets are off. I mean, it just shoots up like a rocket. We could be looking at a rapidly intensifying tropical storm headed into a Category 1 hurricane, potentially Category 2, and then more and more models now are hinting at a major hurricane, and even some of them are hinting at a Category 4 hurricane. So this is definitely very concerning, and that's just in the next 5 days, folks. That's what I'm talking about. So it might not be named for another 24 hours, and then 4 days later, we could be looking at a major hurricane, maybe Cat 3, maybe Cat 4 hurricane. So that's definitely a concern with this system. So here's your overall wind swath from this setup. So taking it basically, again, just kind of south of Jamaica, maybe potentially tropical storm force winds, headed into the Cayman Islands, swinging across. This is the latest European guidance, potentially has a double landfall in particularly South Florida. It could be looking at a potentially another landfall into North Carolina. So obviously we got a lot of uncertainty with this particular trap, but what we're looking at is we could be talking about this storm for all week long, and for the next 7 to 10 days, with it having a lot of impacts with land on the table. And here's the latest GFS, has it pulling a little bit further westbound, but again, as we get a more of a low level center, and as it develops, once it gets named a storm, these models will start to fine tune and kind of hone in on more of a certainty track going forward in the days ahead. But what is concerning from this system, look at all this potential rain where this could make landfall. That's not a misprint, guys. That's over 20 inches of rain. So this is definitely concerning. Could be looking at a major hurricane on top of 20 inches of rain. So this is a definitely huge concern for a good chunk of the Caribbean, Cuba, and especially heading into Florida. It could potentially even be in the portions of the East Coast in, you know, 7 to 10 days from now. So I appreciate you guys watching. Like I mentioned, I want to be looking at, get this out to as many people as possible. So be sure to like this video, share it on social media. All your friends and family could be impacted from this storm. I'm going to be doing 2 updates a day and for the next several days to get the word out as much as possible, and get everybody as safe as possible, because we could be looking at again another potentially high impact event and a major potential landfall for the United States into next week. So thanks for watching. Do like this video, share it on social media, and I'll see you this afternoon.